The RMS Titanic was a British ocean liner operated by the White Star Line. She was the largest ship afloat at the time when she entered service, and the name Titanic is derived from the Titans of Greek mythology. Built in Belfast, Ireland, she was the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners, with the first being the R.M.S. Olympic and the third being the HMHS Britannic. The ship was constructed in Belfast by Harland and Wolff, whose long-established relationship dated back to 1867. Harland and Wolff were given a great deal of latitude with the design of the ship for the White Star Line, and with all of this, Harland and Wolff were authorized to spend what was needed for the ship. In this case, the Titanic costed £1.5 million sterling, or according to Bruce Ismay's U.S. hearings testimony, costed about $7.5 million US. And in modern currency, she would have costed around £140 million sterling, or would have costed roughly $170 million, less than it costed James Cameron to make the blockbuster movie. The order of construction by Harland and Wolff was sent in on the 17th of September 1908, having been laid down on the 31st of March 1909. Almost a year after the order was sent in, she was launched on the 31st of May 1911 for her sea trials, almost 2 years after she was laid down. Then finally, on the 2nd of April 1912, after many delays and setbacks, her construction was finished. Her overall length measured in at 882 feet 9 inches, or 269.1 meters, and her beam was 92 feet 6 inches, or 28.2 meters, with her height from keel to the very tip top of her funnels was 175 feet, or 53.3 meters. She had 9 decks from A to G with 3 main engines, 2 reciprocating 4-cylinder triple expansion steam engines, and 1 centrally placed low-pressure Parsons turbine, each driving a propeller. Each deck on board had a name: the boat deck, on which the lifeboats were housed. It also included the bridge and wheelhouse at the forward end in front of the captain's and officer's quarters. The wheelhouse stood within the bridge, and the bridge itself stood 8 feet or 2.4 meters above the deck, extending outwards on either side, allowing a better view of the ship during the docking period. A deck, which was also called the Promenade Deck, extended along the entire 546 feet superstructure. It was reserved for first-class passengers exclusively and contained their cabins, the first-class lounge, smoke room, reading and writing rooms, and the palm court. B deck, also known as the bridge deck, was the top weight-bearing deck and the uppermost level of the hull. More first-class accommodations were located here, with 6 palatial staterooms, or cabins, featuring their own private promenade decks. The A la carte restaurant and the Café Parisian provided luxury dining facilities to first-class passengers. The second-class smoking room and entrance hall were also located here on this deck. After the bridge deck was the raised poop deck, at 106 feet long, or 32 meters, was used as a promenade by third-class passengers. C deck, or the shelter deck, was the highest deck to run uninterrupted from stem to stern. It included both well decks. The aft one served as part of the third-class promenade. Crew cabins were housed below the forecastle, and third-class public rooms were housed below the poop deck. D deck, or the saloon deck, was dominated by 3 large public rooms: the first-class reception room and the first and second-class dining saloon. First, second, and third-class passengers had cabins on this deck, with berths for firemen located in the bow. It was the highest level reached by the ship's watertight bulkheads, though roughly only half reached. E deck, or the upper deck, was predominantly used for passenger accommodation for all 3 classes, plus berths for cooks, seamen, stewards, and trimmers. A long passageway which ran the length of E deck, nicknamed Scotland Road in reference to a famous street in Liverpool. Scotland Road was used by third-class passengers and crew members. F deck, the middle deck, was the last complete deck and mainly accommodated second and third class passengers and several departments of the crew. The third class dining saloon was located here, as were the swimming pool, Turkish bath, and kennels. G deck, the lower deck, the lowest complete deck that housed passengers, had the lowest portholes just above the waterline. The squash court was also located here, along with the traveling post office, where letters and parcels were sorted ready for delivery when the ship docked. Food was also stored here. The deck was interrupted at several points by orlop, or partial decks, over the boiler, engine, and turbine rooms. The orlop decks and the tank top were on the lowest level of the ship, below the waterline. The orlop decks were used as cargo spaces, while the tank top, the inner bottom of the ship's hull, provided the platform on which the ship's boilers, engines, turbines, and electrical generators were housed. This area of the ship was occupied by the engine and boiler rooms, areas which passengers would have been prohibited from seeing. Her speed at cruising was 21 knots, or 24 miles per hour, and her max speed was only 2 knots more, at 23, or 26 miles per hour. Her capacity for passengers was 2,435, and for the crew was 892, equaling a total of 3,327, or, according to some other sources, was 3,547 passengers. Her lifeboats were an issue, with only having enough lifeboats sufficient enough for 1,178 passengers and crew on board. 20 lifeboats just wasn't enough. The 10th of April, 1912, which is now 109 years ago, was the maiden voyage for the R.M.S. Titanic, carrying prominent passengers such as John Jacob Astor IV, who was the wealthiest man on board, Macy's owner Isidore and Ida Strauss, millionaires Margaret and Molly Brown, with managing director J. Bruce Ismay and the ship's designer Thomas Andrews. Only Bruce and Molly survived the sinking out of the passengers listed here. Titanic's owner, J.P. Morgan, was scheduled to travel on her maiden voyage, but canceled at the last minute. Titanic was planned to arrive at the New York pier on the morning of the 17th of April. She was planned to stop at Ambrose Light before sailing to the New York harbor, but she never made it. The Titanic was in service from the 10th to the 14th of April, where later that night at 11:40 p.m., she fatally struck the iceberg. It was then that First Officer Murdoch ordered the ship to be steered to avoid the iceberg. But with a ship of her size, it was already too late. With 5 of the ship's watertight compartments compromised, it became clear the ship was doomed, as she could not survive with more than 4 of her compartments being flooded. Later on, between 2:10 and 2:15 a.m., a little over 2.5 hours after Titanic struck the iceberg, she began to sink even faster as the boat deck started to dip underwater and seawater pouring in through the open hatches and grates. The stern began rising out of the water, getting higher and higher, and then stopping at about a 30-degree tilt before splitting in half due to immense force on the keel. Finally, at 2:20 a.m., she floundered. Of the roughly 2,200 passengers on board, 1,500 tragically lost their lives, with 710 surviving, with survivors being rescued by the Carpathia, who rushed over in response to the Titanic's distress calls and flares. The wreck of the Titanic now sits 2.5 miles underwater. The broken-off bow section coasted down, speeding at about 21 knots, the same as her cruising speed. The same can't be said about her stern section, though, which corkscrewed down and imploded on her way to the seabed, causing the stern to be barely recognizable. And it wasn't until 1985 when Dr. Robert Ballard found the lost ship. This was thanks to a secret Cold War mission Robert had completed. There was a legacy left behind after the Titanic sank. New safety regulations were put into place, and it became a cultural legend. The lives that were lost, the ship that remains in the dark, will always be remembered. Museums are open for the public to get a hint back to 1912. To when the Titanic sailed the ocean blue, and when she ultimately met her maker at the hands of an iceberg on the night of April 14th, 1912. It truly became a night to remember. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, here is where I get to talk. Actually talk. So I put this here at the end as I only felt right about doing this. I just wanted to say, my passion for the Titanic is huge. I love the ship and the legacy it left behind. And I've studied it for at least a decade at this point, and I'm always finding new things out about it. Which means, this is the anniversary video like the one I did last year, but not 108 years, as it wouldn't make sense for 108 years to go 2 years. This is 109 years. But it's also the continuation of my Olympic-class ocean liner series that I have, which I figured this was perfect to just combine the two, put 2 and 2 together, or 1 and 1. 2 and 2, 1 and 1? Anyway, I figured it was right to put them together, so that's what I did, and here we are. So, this is also the point where I say, if you've made it this far, hey, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.